Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this segment of the oral history of the Diocese of San Jose. And I'm delighted that today we have with us the Chancellor of the Diocese, excuse me, Linda Tully, and I'm looking forward to hearing many stories and your own input in our history. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you.
So tell us, first of all, your background. Did you grow up in the Archdiocese of San Francisco?
No, actually, I was born in Chicago. And when I was 9 years old, our family moved to Mexico City, and we stayed there for 3 years. Then we came to California, and we started in South San Francisco, actually. We were there for a brief time, and then we moved down to San Jose.
Okay.
So we lived in St. Christopher's Parish. My sisters went to St. Christopher's Elementary School, and I attended Presentation High School.
All right. Now, who was pastor at St. Christopher?
It was Monsignor Healy.
Okay.
Monsignor Healy was our pastor at the time.
And that's when we were still part of the Archdiocese.
Very much loved pastor.
Yeah. St. Christopher's been around a while, hasn't it?
Very
that
long
parish?
time.
Yeah. So then you went to Presentation High School.
Presentation High School.
Any of the sisters around that taught you then?
Well, let's see. Marian Stuckey was our principal.
All right.
A couple of years in. Sister Gloria Loya was our religion teacher.
No kidding.
And my Spanish teacher was Sister Inez Hernandez, who I later worked with at the Centro Pastoral.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yes.
That is, that is. Yeah. We were talking with Mary Almack, and she was talking about the Notre Dame sisters, and who were still in the valley that had taught her. So it's just wonderful just to kind of weave in for the diocese. So after Presentation High School, what happened?
Well, I went to college, San Jose State. And then I went to work for a major airline in San Jose and then later San Francisco Airport.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Were you a flight attendant?
No, I was a ticketing and operations agent.
Oh, was it a fun job?
Oh, it was wonderful.
And of course,
it was
that
great
was when
experience.
Flying was lovely.
Yeah, it was great. It was great, and that was where I met Chuck, my husband.
Right.
So it was a very good experience. Yes.
So were you working with the airlines when the announcement came out about our becoming a diocese, January 27th, 1981?
I was.
All right.
I was. It's funny. I think the night after the announcement was made, I was at Bible study. I was going to St. William's for Bible study, and we had this wonderful Marianal priest, Father Steve Mescal, and he told us the announcement, and then he circulated, I think, a press release or something around the table, and we were really excited because the diocese had been growing, well, it wasn't the diocese at the time, but our area, Santa Clara Valley, had been growing by leaps and bounds. We were really coming into our own.
Yeah.
So it seemed like the right time. He told us about Bishop Dumaine. I think there was also a profile biography on Bishop Dumaine. And I remember feeling, really impressed. Here was this man, he had all the right qualifications. He was an expert at communications.
Right.
He had a strong background in Catholic education, and he was fluent in several languages.
Yes,
so,
and particularly in Spanish.
Yes, particularly in Spanish, which was ideal for our diocese. It made him the perfect fit.
Right.
So here we were, this area that was, again, growing. I think we were the fastest growing area in the country.
I wouldn't be surprised.
We were expanding multiculturally, and we were becoming very well known in areas of innovation and technology. So there couldn't have been a better choice. I remember thinking how wonderful it would be to meet him. But little did I know that a few years later I would actually be working for him. So
now tell us how that happened.
From
the airlines to the diocese.
From the airlines to the diocese. There was an ad in one of the parish bulletins that there was an opening for a bilingual secretary for the Centro Pastoral, which is an office of the Hispanic ministry.
Right.
So I got the job, went to work for Sister Gloria Loya. She was the director. Sister Ana Maria Pineda was associate director, and then Richard Ponce was one of the staff members there. And we had a number of other people there as well, including my old teacher, Sister Inez. So here was Sister Inez and Sister Gloria, and it was
you were.
Yeah, there we were. It was a wonderful time. They were they were wonderful people. They were passionate and compassionate. They had a lot of energy, and they were good listeners. They really knew how to engage the Hispanic community, so people really were attracted to them, and it was a very exciting time. I think, one of the very first things that we did when I came, it was 1983, and we were doing intake for the people in Alviso who had been flooded out of their homes.
That dreadful flood.
It was a terrible flood. So people were lining up. They were lining up, and they'd line up for hours to take these reports. And it had come about because the bishop had been very clear. He said, I want the church to be out there with the people taking this information and helping them, because they really didn't trust the city officials very, very much. So
and language issues.
And language issues, of course. So Sister Gloria and Sister Ana Maria, they were excellent because they knew what to do. They had the resources, and then when they couldn't find the answers, they knew someone who could. So it was a very good time. It was good because we were right there, and I think it established a great trust with the people. Yeah. So it was very good.
That is wonderful. So from the Centro Pastoral to the diocesan offices, how did that happen?
Sister Patricia Marie was the Chancellor in 1985.
Right.
So in November she came to me and said, we have a few openings, and I know you had expressed interest in working for my office, for her office. She was a Chancellor. She said, but I think you might be a better fit for the bishop's office. He needs a secretary. His secretary, who was Karen Connor at the time, was leaving to work for Monsignor Mitchell, who was at St. Lawrence of Martyr Parish in Santa Clara. And she said, with your translation talents and the other abilities you have, I think you would be very good. And Pierre, Bishop Duneen, would really like me to ask you, and would kind of like you to consider it. So I didn't have to think too much about it. I was a little nervous, but I took it, and it's been a great decision.
So that was in '85.
That was in '85. Yeah.
Because I came on board in January of '87, so that was about a year and a half after.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that is wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
What was it like working for the bishop?
It was one of the best experiences of my life.
Really?
Yeah, he. I had tremendous respect for him. He was the quintessential Southern gentleman.
Yes.
He was cultured and thoughtful, and he was erudite, very gracious with people. He was a master of language. Not only did he speak Spanish flawlessly, but he could write a homily. Well, he didn't have to write a homily. He could just give it off the cuff, and it sounded as though he'd worked on it for hours.
In English or in Spanish. That's what was amazing to me.
He could go back and forth. He was a perfectionist.
Yep.
That could sometimes intimidate people, but if you could state your case clearly and have all the backup, then he'd pay attention to you.
He also knew that about himself. I can remember one time Liz Lilly was going over something with him, and he was being picky, and she was answering, but she was getting a little impatient, and then he looked at her, he said, let me see, there probably is one more thing I could be picky about. It was just dear.
Yeah. And he could poke fun at himself.
Yeah.
He was the first to do that. He was very deliberate. He wanted to hear all sides of a story before making decisions, and sometimes people thought he took too long to make a decision, but he really wanted to be informed. But he always made very sound and clear decisions. And when he talked, you listened. He was very soft-spoken. But again, that quiet voice could stop everything in a room and really command attention, not just because he was the bishop, but because of the way he said things. So he was a very patient person, and he showed a lot of wisdom in times of conflict and chaos and challenge.
And he certainly had it.
Oh my goodness, yes. Even with the harshest critics, he was the model of tolerance and patience and forgiveness, and I remember during a particularly trying time, he was getting a lot of letters and criticism from people who disagreed with some of the policies that he'd made. And I asked him one time, I said, you know, Bishop, I don't understand. How can you keep turning the other cheek? You only have two. and he said, I said, people are threatening you. They're marching outside your office. They're threatening you and other people with physical violence. How do you do it? And he said, you know, I pray a lot, and I let God do the rest. And I thought, okay, that's yeah, that was his way.
Did you meet some wonderful people when you were his secretary? I do remember once Cardinal Jaime Sin came by.
Yes,
Remember?
he did.
Yeah, that was a thrill because it was right around the time of the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was quite an honor.
Mm-hmm.
He brought me a set of yellow placemats. I still have them.
How
They're
fun.
beautiful hand embroidered placemats. It was quite an honor to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I think. The only other person I can think of I met, I sort of saw, didn't really quite meet, but it was Mother Teresa.
Oh, wow.
She came in 1986, and so I convinced somebody to let me go out and cover the visit.
Of course.
Yes, of course. So it was quite an honor.
Oh, sure.
Very exciting time
Yeah.
to meet her. Yes.
That would be,
Yeah.
That's right.
So
And of course, we were in our offices at St. Joseph College
that's right.
when you were there, and then I seem to remember that there was a baby on the way.
There was a baby on the way. He was very sweet. He, for as serious as he could be, you know, he was very caring about his people, and he actually was the host of the baby shower. So you were there, of course.
I was there.
And his job was to sit. He sat next to me. His job was to hold this paper plate, and he had to punch holes in it.
Right.
And then when someone would give you a present, they took the ribbon off of the present, and he had to stuff the ribbons into the holes.
Right.
Well,
To make the bouquet
yeah.
for the rehearsal.
and you know, so he looked a little lost a couple of times, but he handled it
But
like
he
a
did
pro.
it.
He really did. And I remember it was in the middle of March, and we had the door open to the outside, and this big gust of wind comes blowing in, and all the ribbons flew up in his face.
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, but I do remember that, but it was very cute. Yeah, it was very sweet. When Michael was about 6 months old, he said to me, you know, how's the baby doing? How's Michael Patrick? Well, he's fine. He says, is he walking yet? I said, no, he's still in diapers. He hasn't even learned to crawl.
You're right, he's
So
6 months. Come on.
obviously he had not had a whole lot of experience with children. He was an only child, so,
Right.
but that was nice. When I went on maternity leave, he gave me this card, and it said, here's to your new job. Your bosses will be smaller. Your hours will be longer. The demands will be greater, and the pay will be zero. Come back whenever you're ready.
That's great.
Yeah, that's great.
And when did you come back?
I came back about 3 months later.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I stayed until 1990 when our second child, Kevin, was born, and I stayed home for a few years to be a stay-at-home mom.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then you came back. Where were we then? Because we had so many moves
Right.
as a chancery.
So we had already moved from St. Joseph's Seminary to Lenzen Avenue. And when I came back, the offices were on Lafayette,
Ah, okay.
right by Santa Clara University.
was-
That was
not
in 97.
Yeah. Not a great building, but fabulous location.
That was a great location. Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
was. And you came back in what capacity?
I came back to work for Father Rich Garcia, who had just been made the vicar for clergy.
Uh-huh. And who is now Bishop of Monterey.
Who's now Bishop of Monterey. In fact, I think maybe about 4 months after he was made vicar for clergy, he called me. He called me on the phone one morning. It was a Sunday morning, and said, "You have to keep this to yourself, but here's some news." And that was how
Yeah.
I found out. Yeah,
It was a mixed blessing.
it was. But he was a very kind and gentle man. We
Yes,
were
he's a lovely man.
very blessed to have him. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really true.
Yeah.
It is indeed. So then after working for Rich, what happened?
Well, when he left to go to Sacramento, and then we had a vacancy. Monsignor, who was in Father Francilia, came. He was at Holy Family as pastor there, and he was the interim vicar for clergy until Bishop Dumaine named him permanently, appointed him as vicar for clergy in 1998.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
So we worked together during that time, and then through his, I think when he was appointed Vicar General, I stayed in the office for a couple of years with Monsignor Willie Manrique, and then later in 2005 I went again to work for the Vicar General, Monsignor Cilia, and with Bernino Hedera in the Office for Protection of Children and Vulnerable Adults.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, our deacon.
Yes.
He still is a deacon
He's
of the
still a
Diocese
deacon.
of San
Yes,
Jose.
he is. Yes,
even
he
though
is.
he's in Washington.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you became chancellor in
2012.
2012. So you've
Yes.
been 5 years.
Yes.
Wow. So you've seen a lot of changes in the diocese over the years.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the challenges becoming chancellor?
I would say, well, just learning the job, but also trying to integrate that with the other things I was doing, because at the time I was still working for the Office for Protection of Children and Vulnerable Adults. But I had a good assistant, still have the same wonderful assistant, Suzanne.
She is a
She is
gem.
fantastic. And a very fine archivist, Spain Bentley. So they kept me in line. They kept me in line, they educated me, and it's been very good. Bishop has been very supportive, and Monsignor Fran, of course, has been very supportive and helpful. So
That is great. Yeah, because I remember Sister Patricia Marie saying years ago that the chancellor's job can be what the chancellor makes it to be. I mean, canon law has some issues or some things that you're supposed to be doing, but otherwise, she said, you can make it whatever.
that's somewhat true. I think it's sort of evolved into it's what the bishop wants you to do.
Sure.
So you can do any sort of variety of things, and one of the things that I do now is also help in the clergy with the clergy personnel, which is very helpful. Yes, but Sister Patricia Marie, she was an inspiration. She was.
Talk about one of the great women leaders of the church.
Exactly, she was. She had a very sweet way, but very subtle way of influencing people. She was powerful, but she didn't come out and show it. She would come up to you and she would suggest something, and you could sort of see the sense in what she was saying, and you knew it was the right thing to do. So she also had a way of looking out for people. She was kind of the mother of the staff, right? As well as a kind of a go-between, a liaison between the bishop and the people who worked with him or came to see him. So she was a very powerful person, but I had a great admiration for her.
I too.
And tremendous respect, because I always thought that she was the epitome of what a servant employee should be.
Yes, and that was her whole thing. And she was interesting. She wouldn't talk about power. She would talk about influence.
Yes.
Again, as you were mentioning, that subtle kind of.
A tremendous influence.
Oh my.
Yes, but very modest. Very,
yes.
very modest
but if
about
Patricia Marie asked you to do something, you did it.
that. Yeah.
And you were glad you did, because
That's
she was
right.
always right.
That's right.
Yeah, it's really true. And of course, with Bishop Pierre too, his whole sense of the diocesan staff as family was very, very strong. I often wondered if it was because he was an only child, but he really did consider it to be family. And remember the Christmas parties, and he'd be running around in that tatty gray sweater
with his Polaroid,
taking pictures,
And I think that helped him go into the room a little easier. I think he was sort of, he was an introvert.
He was an introvert.
And I think that Polaroid was his tool, and it really helped him get in the midst of people and gave him something to talk about. And people loved going upstairs to look at the pictures.
Exactly.
Very
and when
nice.
you think of his Polaroid,
his Polaroid, yeah.
How far we've come since.
How far we've come. That's right. And I'm sure he'd love. I can just imagine him, with one of the new cameras now.
Oh, yeah. He loved tech. Wasn't he the chair of the American Bishops Committee on Technology at one point? I think he was at one point in his career. Yeah,
it could be.
because he always valued, and Catholic Television Network, he
Communications,
was,
something like
yeah.
that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
because he was just a huge booster of Catholic Television
That's
Network.
right.
Yeah, and used it. I mean, he used it very well.
Yeah, and I think he met with a lot of tech leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Even in those early years, I think he did quite a bit of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right. So what do you see as our strengths of our diocese now?
Oh my goodness. Well,
I mean, our history, I think, is one.
I think we have a lot of strengths. I think we're more diverse than we ever were, and that enriches us. We have 317 priests in our diocese
No kidding.
from 27 countries,
That wouldn't surprise me.
speaking 31 languages.
Wow.
So we're really multicultural, not just in the makeup of our people, but also our priests. I think that's a great strength.
It is.
I think a great strength is that we've had strong leaders. Our bishops have been very pastoral and visionary. Bishop McGraw is a voice for justice, for good, and he takes us forward in a positive way. I think our pastoral plan has been very strong, very positive for us, because not only has it given us kind of a roadmap to follow and focus our ministry on, but it was unique because it was one of the first ones in the United States in which a bishop decided he wanted something like that and turned to the people, asked his people for the input. So he brought parishioners together and priests and staff members and had them determine what the needs were of
Remember the dots?
the dots. And so from all those conversations came the priorities that we have. Faith formation, youth and young adult ministry, education, lay leadership formation, of course, which you were a great part of, liturgy, focus on the liturgy. And yet, with all those things, he has made it very clear that this is a living, breathing document. It's not going to be stale. It'll change with the times, just like us. So that's a tremendous strength, I think. It is. It's a
And of
wonderful
course,
strength.
Bishop McGraw is coming to the end of his term, and I think a lot of us are anxious about the third Bishop of San Jose because we've been so blessed with the first two.
I think we've been blessed, and I have to think that we'll continue to be blessed.
I like that.
I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we're a work in progress, right?
This is true.
We started in 1981. Our diocese will turn 40 years old 4 years from now in 2021. 40 years. So although in the history of the church that's not very old, we're not quite a brand new diocese anymore.
No.
But we have to remember that excitement. And I think that, whatever happens, and whoever the new man is, whoever that new bishop may be, we need to embrace him. I think we need to be open to change, just as we should be open to change in just about everything we do. We can look back at the old times and we can think about those good things that happened in our past, but we need to learn from those. And as much as we honor those things, we need to really embrace our future. Here we are in Silicon Valley.
I know.
This place of tremendous excitement. So whoever comes will be meant to be. And
Good for you.
Yeah, I think good for all of us. Good for all of us, right? Because it will be a blessing, and we'll find new ways of doing things, and continue to have that excitement.
Sure.
So we can move forward. We can build a strong diocese for future generations.
And that will be one of our challenges.
Yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah. So, anything else we should be talking about?
I can share a few other stories with
Good,
you.
please.
I can go back and tell you a little bit about the I'll tell you a little bit about the Centro. One of the things we would talk about at the Centro Pastoral were what Sister Gloria used to refer to as the momentos históricos e histéricos, the hysterical
or
and the historic
historical.
moments. I think one of the historic moments for us was when Bishop Dumaine, he'd been meeting with her and with Sister Ana Maria Pineda. And Sister Ana Maria had also been working on the Instituto de Ministerio, which was a lay leadership development program for Hispanic lay leaders. And after all the meetings, at one point Bishop Dumaine announced that he was going to make Hispanic ministry one of his main priorities for diocesan ministry. That was a point of pride for all of us.
Sure.
That was one of our momentos históricos. One of the momentos histéricos, the hysterical moments, was probably in about 1984. We got a phone call from a man who wanted to come and talk to Sister Gloria. You have to understand, again, they're very accessible, very compassionate, and people would come to the door all the time looking for advice. So this man was very insistent, and on the phone he was pretty gruff. He had to see her. And so one of the things he also wanted to know was who was in the office and how many people were there. So I couldn't quite figure this out, but I gave her the phone, and she talked to him for a little while, and I could see she was a little bit thrown off, but she got off the phone and said, okay, it's just you and me. We can't let anyone else in. There is a man who's coming to see me, and he has some very specific requirements.
Misterioso.
Very misterioso. So one of the instructions he had given was that no one was to come into the house. We had to lock all the doors and the windows.
Oh, mercy.
So we did that. And then we put a close sign. I think we made a close sign and put it on the door. And then we called Father Jorge Lopez, who was the pastor at Our Lady of Guadalupe right next door, and said, this is what's going on. There's a man who's coming to see her, and he has a very serious issue to discuss. He was a member of the Mexican Mafia.
No kidding.
And so we were a little uncertain, but okay, we'll just go along with it and see what happens. And so right about the time he was supposed to arrive, we see this man walking up and down the street. He comes in the gate, and then he goes and looks around, tries all the locks, and goes around the back of the house.
This is like a movie.
And I'm thinking, okay, what's happening next? So he's pretty satisfied that things are locked, and we didn't have cell phones, so he sort of gestures to someone down the block. And then this very large man comes up, tattoos all over him, and on his face, and we realized this man had his own bodyguard. So we let him in, and he never spoke to me. He talked to Sister Gloria, and he would tell her what to tell me. He said, now you tell her to stay at her desk the whole time, not to leave her desk, and to stay away from the windows. Okay. So they went into the back room in her office, and they talked for a while. They left the door open. She made sure that the door had to be open.
Good.
They talked for quite some time. He was a hitman for Nuestra Familia.
Okay.
And he had been a hitman for many years.
That was his profession.
It was his profession, yes. And then at some point he had decided that he really needed to change his ways. But you can't just give your resignation and say, I'm moving out of the area. I'm done now. So that's why he had the bodyguard, and that's why we had all this security. And this bodyguard, in the meantime, is marching up and down, and he's looking at his watch, and he's looking at the building, and he's looking out on the street, and you could see, he's touching his pockets. And so that was what he wanted. He wanted to come, and he wanted to pray with her and try to figure out what he was going to do. And so they finally came out, they sat down on the couch, and they prayed, and he rolled up his trouser leg and said, now I want you to know I'm not lying. And he showed us, he had this huge scar on his calf. You could see the bone, see through to the bone. I don't think he really had it treated. And so she, very pastoral with him, and finally they came to the end of the conversation. She gave him a hug and said goodbye, and out he went. That was the last I saw of him.
Wow.
So I don't know if he ever made it to his new life. I hope he did. That was one of our hysterical moments. Yes,
Then you went
yes.
around and opened the windows and the doors.
Yes, and comforted the poor priest next door, who was probably going out of his mind, wondering if we were okay. But thanks be to God, we were fine.
That is a great story.
It was wonderful. Another story about the seminary. You know, of course, you were there, and you know how we all went to Mass together. We were a very close-knit group.
Yeah, at St. Joseph's.
At St. Joseph's, yes. We went to Mass together. We had lunch in the dining room together,
yeah.
and sometimes we'd take walks together. Well, one day at lunch, we were sitting with the seminarians. I was at this one table of seminarians, and one of them was talking about his discernment. He was trying to decide whether to go to become a pre-med student or if he should continue toward the priesthood. So as part of that discernment, he had shadowed an OBGYN.
Okay.
And he got a chance to witness a C-section. So there was a lot of excitement at the table because,
sure.
you know, the guys, they wanted to know all the details. And so it was, you know, the conversation went between the miracle of life and the poor father who'd fainted when the baby came out. So they were very excited. So lunch ends, and we're all walking back in the courtyard back to work, and they're going off to class, and they said, you know, and I happened to be pregnant at the time. They said, you know, we were wondering, when you have the baby, could we come and be there for the labor and delivery? We'd really like to see it because, you know, we're all going to be priests one day. We're never going to have this opportunity. And if we couldn't all fit in there, could we maybe videotape it too so that the other guys could see it? So, of course, thankfully I knew where this had been coming from. So I wasn't too sure what to say. I said, you know, my doctor's very strict. She'll only allow my husband in the room and no one else, absolutely no one else. And then before they could say anything else, I turned around and went up the stairs to my office, and these poor guys just walked away. They were so disappointed. Oh my goodness, yeah. But
it was fun.
It was
having
fun.
The seminarians
It was
around.
fun.
I can remember that.
Yeah, they were wonderful. You could hear them singing in the halls.
Mm-hmm. In fact, Father Gerardo Menchaca, I remember,
Yes.
was and Father Chris Bransfield. were
And
there.
Father Mark Catalana.
And Father Mark Catalana.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes, it was beautiful.
It was very fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good stories.
yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm so glad that we had a chance to sit down and chat.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Well, thank you for this, and thank you for this oral history project. You and Father Leger, I appreciate that very much. You know, as Chancellor, it's a very special thing for me because I value, and I know you value this too, the preservation of our history and this opportunity to share the experiences and some of the wisdom of the people who have founded the diocese and some of the ones who come after. And I think it's important because as future generations look at these videos or hear these stories, they can see that our experiences may have been different and the people may have been different, but what was in our hearts and our hopes and our dreams, they remain the same. And it gives us some insight as to why we're going where we're going. So I thank you very, very much for this.
You're most welcome.
Quite
and
a
I
treasure.
think that's a great way for us to end. Amen.